This episode of the Vincast is brought to you by Vinous, an iPhone app which recognises any wine bottle with just a snap of a photo in an effort to break down barriers for people to enjoy wine. Really simple app to use, guys. All you have to do is download it through the App Store. When you've got a bottle of wine you're tasting, enjoying, and you want to keep a record of it or you want to share it with your friends, just take a photo of the label. The label goes up into a cloud and image recognition software recognizes what the wine is based on that label and then tells you what it is. So it's a great way to keep a record of wines you've enjoyed in the past, but in an effort to share it with other wine lovers, friends, family. You can follow people, they can follow you back, but it's also really excellent to link in with other social networks like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Everyone who uses Vinous is in Australia and New Zealand, so it means that the wines you are enjoying and your networks are enjoying are always going to be available. And it also gives you accurate real-time information about where you might be able to buy a wine you've enjoyed or would like to try, but also what you can expect to pay for it. If you do use Vinous, I highly recommend following featured users like myself, wine professionals or other wine lovers. But the idea is just to have fun. So jump onto the iTunes store, download Vinous and start snapping away. Hello there, Vincasters, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Scaresbrook, also known as the Intrepid Wino. And here we are, episode 28. I think I've been doing the podcast for over a year now. I hope you've been enjoying some of the recent episodes with such guests as Matthew Jukes and last week's episode with Sam Hooper talking about wine shows. Really would love to hear from anyone listening, any feedback, any questions you might have, what you thought about some of the topics and some of the discussions. I would love to make the podcast a little bit more interactive. Always appreciate people commenting on the blog or on Twitter or particularly on iTunes or Stitcher. And if you are there, I would love for you to subscribe so you can get the newest episode downloaded straight away, and would also appreciate any rating or review you could leave for me. Now, for episode 28, I was joined by my very good friend Owen Latta, who is probably best known as the winemaker for Peake, which he took over from his father Norman some years ago. But Owen isn't just involved at Peake, he's also making wine for a number of other different projects, and also he and his fiancée Jen own a lovely little wine shop and bar in Daylesford, where they now live, called Wine and the Country. And so we talked a little bit about the background of Peake, but also his experiences as a winemaker and where he would like to take all the projects he's working with into the future. So enjoy the episode and make sure to get in touch with Owen as well. Thank you for joining me today, Owen.
No dramas, James.
Owen, you are obviously a multi-generational winemaker yourself. What's your kind of the first memory of wine that you can remember, that your first sort of interaction with wine?
It's probably more to do with the vineyard, because the vineyard was being planted as I was born. So
that was by your dad or your parents?
By my parents. My mum answered an advert in the local newspaper, and the guy who put the advert in there happened to be Trevor Mast of Mount Lang in Duran.
And when you say local, where were you living? Where did you grow up?
They'd bought a property up near Ballarat in a little town called Cogles Creek. There's not much going on there. It's all potato based, or it was. Now it's grain and livestock, and small amount of vineyards. But yeah, so they moved from the city, because
being Melbourne.
Yep. And my mum's name's Diane. Old man's name is Norman.
Yep.
So they wanted to be self-sufficient farmers in the country, and so they established a little property out there, planted the vineyard under guidance, and so I was just been in the vineyard ever since. So I'm 30 now, and the vineyard's 31. So
well, there you go.
you could say I haven't really known anything else.
Two of you have grown up together. What kind of why did they choose to plant vineyards? And I mean, if it's a self-sustaining farm, they work with other agricultural products.
Yeah, it was kind of like a permaculture farm. You could say lots of different stuff going on there.
Okay.
But so they milked their own cows. They had a veggie patch. It's a small farm. Like everyone else there had 100 acres plus.
Yeah.
We had 20. So it's quite small for the land mass there. And there was actually an issue where they weren't allowed to build a residence or a dwelling on the property because it was too small with town.
Too small?
Yeah, so there's a bit of craftiness that went into that to try and get to build on the property, because now it's fine. You can do whatever you like. But back then there was lots of challenges. So that's how it was. But yeah, going back to the vineyard.
What sort of guidance? This is through.
It was the whole way through. Like Trevor would come up and say, "This is what you need to be doing. This is how you plant it." Because he was looking for the coldest site that you could possibly find in Australia, because he travelled and studied in Germany.
Sure.
And so he really knew what he was after.
Probably at Geisenheim.
Yeah, that's where he was. Yeah. So, and he didn't speak any German, but left speaking fluent German. So
wow.
That's another story in itself. Yeah. If only you could interview him.
Yeah, it is a shame. Unfortunately, obviously, he passed away a few years ago. And so the idea was to be growing grapes to provide to Mount Huron.
Well, he had another label. So the whole idea of the vineyard was to find the best sparkling Pinot Noir in Australia.
Right.
So he made 2 different vintages of sparkling using our fruit.
Sure.
And then he bought Langy, and it took off from there. So there was a grey label for all of his growers a long time ago. So there was a Ballarat Pinot back in the 80s and early 90s, and that was our fruit.
Oh, right. Okay.
So he bought it up until 1993.
And then based on his kind of assessment of that cool site, did he find you, or did you buy it for that purpose?
Yeah, so going back to that newspaper article,
there
was 50 applicants that applied to go and plant a vineyard like all over Victoria.
Okay.
And it had to be Victorian.
Yep.
There was 5 sites selected. Mm-hmm. 2 sites were planted and 1 was successful, and that was us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a pretty risky thing, because the olds, they had no idea about growing grapevines.
Sure.
So they just wanted to plant it and grow grapes and sell them. And
that particular part of Victoria, if it at that time was kind of the coldest site for viticulture in Australia, what is it that makes it so cold?
Well, we pick really late. We have really cold winters. So we always pick the end of April, even May. Okay. So some places in Tasmania are similar to that.
Sure.
And in the Macedon Ranges.
Yeah.
But most of Australia's other viticulture for Pinot Noir, that's well and truly picked by March.
But is it elevation, the distance from the coast, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so inland. So great Pinot, you look at Burgundy, it's inland. Yeah. It's elevation. So we have 430 metres where we are. And of course it's inland and it's quite cold.
Particularly, I would think, being inland and without that sort of moderating influence of a large body of water, the nighttime temperatures would be pretty low.
Yeah, it drops way off where we are. And also, because it's part of the Great Dividing Range, all the heat just rolls straight off into the valley below. Yeah, okay. Creswick is. Okay. And it's the same with frost too. We actually have never really been frosted where we are. Wow, because of the site. It just rolls off the hill, and very fortunate because there's been some horror stories around with our neighbours, like only 5 kilometres down the road. Yeah. Well, I remember back in the days when I would work in the Yarra Valley, particularly on the floor, there were some pretty disastrous vintages that were sort of almost wiped out because of a frost. And of course, based on Trevor's requirements, the decisions were made to plant Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But what kind of choices were being made about how they were planted, or how you're going to be working the vineyards? Were there any kind of philosophies, or just sort of, this is kind of what's going to work for us? They were all set up on, this is the 80s, so it was set up on Australian standards, just say 3 metre wide rows, because that's what a tractor would fit down. Yeah. And that's the whole reason why rows are that width. Okay. Well, where we are anyway. The Chardonnay, that Trevor actually hated Chardonnay. So that was planted on Norm's own bat because he wanted to see what would happen and been told that's a good variety to plant because you got to think back, like that's early 90s as well. Like it was kind of on trend at that time, but at the same time, no one really knew like where that was going to go as well. So it was good that he chose that variety there. Like Riesling and Chenin Blanc would have been interesting too, but I guess that's up to me to plant in the future.
Well, I think probably Chardonnay is certainly still a much safer bet. Riesling and Chenin Blanc could certainly come back into fashion a little bit more. But again, if we're talking like, the vineyard is now 30 years old, if you're planting stuff now, who knows what the trends might be in 30 years' time. Yeah,
well, I just want to plant it because I know that those varieties would probably work, especially Chenin, because it's like there is a similar sort of style, you could say, to the area of where we are has a similar style to the Loire.
Okay.
It's still miles apart.
Yeah.
Like we never compare ourselves to Burgundy or anywhere else.
Sure.
Because where we are is Cogles Creek. And that'll always be Cogles Creek.
Yeah.
But it does provide similar acid structure and sort of similar tannins and stuff as well because of the climate we have.
A lot of people would think that those three varieties are the terroir translators. Because particularly in terms of minerality that, you're deriving from the soils.
You can't grow them anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, you can, but...
in very specific places.
It depends what the style of wine you want.
And do you have sort of much memory early on about sort of being out in the vineyards and having the affinity with that?
It was cheap labour for my parents, so that was me out there. And most other people who've been in those situations where their parents have owned a vineyard have nothing to do with vineyards later in life. Sure, they avoid it like the plague. And
so did you kind of know from a pretty early stage that you kind of wanted to follow in the career path and continue the family tradition? Yeah.
Well, look, it excites me to this day. Like I was out in the vineyard doing a pretty laborious, horrible job, retraining vines. But that's the start where it all begins again.
Sure.
Because there's old vines there that need a bit of work.
Yeah.
So that's where I was. But the winemaking is the major thing. Like going up to when I was a little kid, you'd probably say I was about 5 or 6 years old. The cellar hands up at Langy, they would always be, showing the kids up there what's happening. Mm-hmm. This is this juice from this variety. Mm-hmm. I can still remember those flavors and stuff now. It's
cool.
It's quite bizarre, but that's where it all came from.
And was there a real sense of community within, even though it's an area that doesn't have as much viticulture as some of the really established regions like the Yarra Valley or like the Barossa Valley? Were you within that community kind of with other kids of winemakers?
Yeah, there was a huge fellowship. So we were pretty close to everyone in the Grampians.
Yeah.
Didn't really see much of the Pyrenees guys, even though they were so close.
Sure.
There's more Grampians, and you'd go up there and it was like an extended family up that way.
Sure.
Because you're this little vineyard in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And people wanted to know why you've planted there.
Sure.
And you're investing in infrastructure locally. And it's pretty exciting. But it's a little bit different these days. I don't see that fellowship as around as much anymore. It's sort of people are interested, but at the same time, you give them a bit of information and it goes a long way and doesn't come back around again.
Right.
Yeah. So it'll come around again because people are beginning to plant more vineyards again, which is really exciting in places where...
And younger people also kind of getting involved and getting interested in...
They are, yeah. I think the Australian wine industry was sort of a bit stale for 15 years. I'm not being arrogant or anything anyway, but it just sort of seemed like there wasn't a lot going on because people were... Well, everything was already established.
In the same way that, like if you look at, for example, the global financial crisis, it's kind of made people have to rethink and try and do things a little bit differently as well. And so I think there is kind of a new generation of people who want to work in the wine industry, both in terms of viticulture, winemaking, and then kind of the business and communication side. They want to come in and sort of say, no, let's bring in some fresh ideas and let's try and do things differently because the Australian wine industry was in a kind of a slump.
Everyone was chasing those big styles.
Yeah.
And people have now travelled and understood like what we used to do.
But that's
was
the thing,
right way.
Consumers, around the world kind of got a little bit tired of the same styles of wines that they perceived coming out of Australia, and then obviously we had years and years of a glut of wine, and so I think change is and will always be an inevitability.
Yeah.
When you were going to school, did you sort of learn anything to do with agriculture or winemaking at all?
Yeah, I did like an agriculture course, which was all about just learning how to fix fences and ride motorbikes,
right?
Which was fun, like on an afternoon.
Stuff, yeah.
But yeah, like just coming home, what I learnt at home was most important.
Sure.
Yeah, and I've been off and studied at university, but a lot of that stuff there is mostly networking. You're learning a bit extra about why science works in a way that it does.
Yeah.
Having more of an understanding.
Look, I've had a number of winemakers who have studied it. Obviously, the major universities, Charles Sturt and Adelaide, and they kind of felt that it gave them a framework. It's a top-down approach and sort of gives you the ability to work in the largest kind of winery you could possibly imagine, to then kind of go, okay, well, now I know what is out there. Now I'm going to work out what's right just for me.
Yeah, that's so I was sort of a bit different because I'd grown up with a minimal intervention approach to winemaking.
Okay,
so like Trevor's approach was nothing which carried on to my dad. So he actually had to spend a bit of time trying to forget a lot of the science stuff, even though he was very smart with the way he went about the scientific approach of winemaking.
Just Trevor.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he just always was like saying, as a mentor to my father, to say, tread lightly on what you have. If you've got the best fruit somewhere, you don't have to do anything to it. Mm-hmm. So just be aware of certain things. So I've always had that approach. Don't add sulfur until it's been through malolactic fermentation. You don't need to filter. You don't have to fine. Mm-hmm. It's like everything should be there if the season's been kind, because you've got a great site. So for me, going to university and already knowing that stuff, and then they're training you to not have that stuff.
Sure.
It was all right for me, but seeing
it's almost like a way for you to learn why you would choose not to do it.
Yeah, and I already understood all that, but seeing everyone else going there and learning this stuff, and now watching them having to try and forget that stuff, like move away from it big time, because
10 years later.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because everyone's now going this new approach, which is awesome. So the consumer is getting better wine.
Yeah. Or certainly more authentic wine.
Yeah.
Was your dad making the wine right from the beginning for himself? So
we sold grapes up until 1993. Built a winery in 94. Yep. So the guys up there said, we made you plant this vineyard. Shiraz is our direction up here. Mm-hmm. But we want to see you guys establish your own winery and go on your own journey. And we'll support you in any way. So they gave us equipment. I don't think anyone would do what they did for us back then, or you could probably pay a lot of money to be consulted in that role. But they really looked after us, and it was all on the job learning. So Dad, for the 95 vintage, was his first one.
That was the first commercial vintage?
Yeah, jumped straight in the deep end.
Right.
We were actually allowed to buy back the 93 and 94 vintages from Lang to actually have stock to sell.
Sure.
So we opened, we had wines to sell. So 95 was his first vintage, and I still remember being in the back of the old yellow Tirana or something, which was Dad's car back in the day, going up to Lang. He said, why is this doing this? And they're like, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Wow, okay.
Like all these bits and pieces, because it's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that.
Sure.
And there's no one else nearby that could tell you anything.
No.
You'd have to go an hour up the road.
And no real viticultural tradition of any kind in that area.
We were the first.
Sure.
Well, one of the first, yeah. So it was all just let it be and see what happens, but just keep asking questions. Yeah. So that was a good vintage. 96 was a very challenging vintage because it was cold and wet, and 97 was the year he nailed it. So it's when he really started working out what was going on.
That's a pretty good track record though, to sort of be able to, you have one good, one bad, and then now I know exactly what to do.
Yeah. Well, 96 it rained and it didn't stop raining, and he said, I don't want it to ever rain again, and it didn't. So from 97 onwards, we had a drought.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, up until 2011.
Sure. Yeah.
So it was pretty dry.
2011 was pretty wet. And,
But we irrigated for 15 years, and we haven't irrigated for 15 years. So we've been dry grown.
Is that a conscious choice, or is it?
Yeah, we wanted to
just not
see
needed
the
to?
vines do their thing.
Sure.
So we've seen them heavily stressed where we probably should have irrigated.
Yeah.
Went to irrigate, and our bore had actually dried up. So
Oh,
we
okay.
had like excellent bore water.
Sure.
And it was not there anymore. So we were just like, well, we'll have to sink a new bore, and yeah. But then it rained, so we still haven't irrigated.
Almost fate is sort of is stopping
But
you not needing to.
I love the idea of dry grown, and I love seeing the wines out of it. But from a commercial perspective, it's not really worthwhile because
So it's risky.
It's pretty risky in Australia, especially in our climate, and especially last year when we had no rain from September until March. It's a long time without a drop from the sky.
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, obviously, with the slightly cooler climate and colder nighttime temperatures,
It's
it
producing
is
good
going to
wine.
mitigate it a little bit. In the much warmer temperatures, you're basically just going to be cooking the fruit.
Yeah, well, it's just bad for flowering because there was no moisture in the ground,
Yeah, that too.
and it was hot and dry winds. Everyone was the same boat. It's just you either had a good crop because you had some water and you got it at the right time,
Yeah.
or it was a pretty mixed bag.
When was your unofficial or official sort of first vintage in terms of the winery?
So I in 1999 was the first time that I've always been involved in touching the grape, picking them, being there, watching them being processed. But the old man, I'd come home from school and he'd fallen over, walked backwards over a muss line by accident and got concussion, like severe concussion where he actually couldn't look up or anything. It was quite ill. So he just said to me, just do what you've seen and you'll have to do the rest of the vintage because no one else really knows what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's where I jumped in the deep end. So I'd go in, do the plunging, check everything as a kid at 15 years old.
Yeah.
And then go to school, have red wine stains on my shirt, get in trouble from teachers. Have you been drinking? It's like, no, I've been making it.
Been working.
Yeah, been working. I had a bit of an influence on the 99 vintage all by chance.
Sure.
And from there on, it just stemmed that this is what I want to do. I set my path to that.
Okay.
Also sort of had its challenges being underage.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
we won't tell anyone.
yeah, it's too late now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could say I've been making
Statute
wine
of
for
limitations.
15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then my first, all on my own. So we had a transition phase. I went to uni in 2002 and I moved home after doing some other bits and pieces and moved home the end of 2006. And we shared the 06 and the 07 vintage. And then pretty much from there on, it's been me, the winery.
But your dad's still involved in some way?
Not really. He has muscular dystrophy. So he sort of just says what money I have to spend. Can I buy this new piece of equipment?
No.
No.
You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Have you had the opportunity to work vintages anywhere else?
Yeah, I've done a few stints here and there at places. It's just that I don't get time to go anywhere. I'd love to go and do more in Europe. I'd like to go and do a little bit more in Burgundy. I really want to go down to the south of Italy, do something different down there.
Sure.
Yeah. It's just my time's running my own business with all those extra labels.
Of course.
But yeah, I've been I was meant to go and work in Bordeaux with a couple of friends at a pretty big winery because in 2008 I worked at Yarraburn in the Yarra Valley and that was pretty good. I met lots of people who were actually going off to do the next vintage.
Sure.
In the Northern Hemisphere, so
it's a little bit different, I guess, particularly with winemaking students or young winemakers who probably aren't from wine family and who aren't kind of almost being groomed to take over eventually. But even some of them, I would think, if you're having to kind of get a lot more involved in the winery, you don't have the luxury of being able to just sort of take a jaunt up to
Yeah.
Europe for the vintage, 1, 2, 3 years in a row.
Yeah. If I'm not there, everything stops.
Sure.
So it is what it is. But like I was meant to go to this place and my visa didn't work out. The Schengen visa. It's just I couldn't get it together in time. Probably my fault for being a bit disorganised. But that's fine.
It sounds like a typical winemaker.
Yeah, well, we're all the same. But I was very lucky. So it worked out better looking back on my experience. So I travelled around for about 3 months, but I had a great mate, Alex Byrne, who's got another wine label called Byrne Wines. He was working in Gevrey-Chambertin for a guy called Pierre Naigeon. So I went there and did a bit of work for about a week and got the gist of what we were doing at our place was pretty much what all Burgundians sort of really do.
Yeah.
Our wax, concrete, well, not wax, but our concrete fermenters, the way we approach with our whole bunch usage and, wild yeast, what you do and what you're looking at with the fruit. So it's pretty interesting to see those similarities. And I was talking to the assistant winemaker there, well, trying to, because I can't speak a lot of French at all. And I was pretty green back then, and he couldn't understand my thick accents, which I don't think is too thick, but over there it seemed quite thick. So he was shocked that I used all these principles and I was from Australia and I was of an age of like 20, was I probably 24 or something over then. So it was really good that they said, well, that's awesome that you guys are actually doing that. And the site's this, because Australian wine internationally, no one sees these little guys like us around. So
well, it really does. It's amazing how much things have changed in Australia just in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
That like a little bit more of the what I would kind of consider traditional techniques used in Europe have been embraced a lot more, particularly with the smaller and younger kind of winemakers in Australia who may have had the opportunity to work vintages over in Europe.
Just going back to our roots.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what everyone used to do, like pre-commercialisation of wineries. Before there was stainless steel and plastic containers and all these other things you can buy in a packet.
Machines.
Yeah. There was, it was all about the vineyard and whatever got you to the end was what it was. Yeah.
So tell me about how the approach has evolved, I guess, since you kind of took on the reins to now. What are sort of the real key factors in terms of viticulture and then winemaking?
Yeah, so with the viticulture, I'm in a process where I want to go biodynamic, but not to be certified. Like it's a bit tough at the moment because I'm the only one that's there. So hopefully looking forward into the future, I can actually have someone work for me, a couple of days a week, and we can start implementing that because there'll be more time to spend in the vineyard. But I'm not there as much. But what we do...
So it's not simply, obviously, conversion across to biodynamics is not simply a question of just stopping spraying and using chemicals and stuff like that. There are a little bit more work in the vineyard. Would you sort of be looking at kind of planting a little bit closer as well?
No.
Just keep it as it is? Okay.
Yeah. If I do another planting, it'll be the same row width.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's good that what people are doing, and you do get a good style, but just from an infrastructure perspective, we'll see what happens. I'll probably change my mind.
Never say never.
Yeah, you never say never. Yeah, I love close planted vineyards, and there's a few that have gone in, and there's one in Ballarat that's close planted, and it produces great fruit from there.
Sure.
Yeah, but we'll just see for the time being.
Okay.
Yeah, but practices in the vineyard, we've always you could say it's an organic approach, but I don't actually believe in organics.
Okay.
It's a process.
Sure.
It's not a philosophy. So, and it's people are just you can buy all the organic stuff off a shelf and you can say that you're organic after the time to be certified, whereas biodynamics, you've really got to live and breathe it. And that's the reason why I'd like to go that path, because it's better for the vines. But looking at our vines, we don't add any fertilizer to them. I have made this stuff. It's like a fermented manure and molasses strange thing that me and another guy had made together. So I've been putting that out, and it takes about 3 years for it to start working, and I'm beginning to see a little bit of it working as well.
Okay.
But it seems like it's quite a lot of effort to get it out there.
Yeah.
But we've never added fertilizer to the vineyard.
Great.
And we just spray with copper and sulfur,
Which is pretty standard.
Pretty standard. With the seasons, well, look, I've only put one spray on this season, and I'm way behind the 8 ball on that. But I don't think it's going to need a lot this season so far. Mm-hmm. It's nice and dry. There's not a lot of rain around, and there's no humidity, so we might only get away with spraying 4 times.
Yeah.
But in seasons where they're challenging, like 2011, 2012, we have used stuff which I don't like using, which is synthetic products. Mm-hmm. But, from a small business that solely relies on having a crop, I'm glad that we put them out.
Sure.
Yeah. Which is what you've got to do.
Yeah.
And the wines look really good, but it's just, it has been, the end product got there by using something that we haven't made, or we haven't got us over the line.
I think the important thing is kind of transparency and actually sort of talking about it and being honest and saying, look, this is what we did, and it's not something that we would have really loved to have done, but it was necessary for us to actually be able to come in with a viable crop. And we feel that we've still, produced wines that are representative of us. They're a little bit different this vintage because of the vintage conditions, nature of wine.
Yeah. Whereas if you look at what happens in the winery, it's very hands off. So we've always made a choice to not use sulfur.
Okay.
We don't have refrigeration. Okay. We use the yeasts that are the indigenous yeasts in the vineyard, because we've now said that
as in they come in with the fruit, and then
yeasts are on the fruit.
The wine just sort of, the juice just starts fermenting spontaneously.
Yeah. Well, look, after seeing the 20 years of watching the wine being made there, we have used cultured yeast some years, and a bit of a mix. So it'd start fermenting, and you'd sprinkle a bit of yeast out of a packet on the top.
Yeah.
But now I've just I don't do that at all really anymore. There's some wines that I do, because I know that those vineyards, the yeasts are bad in those vineyards, and they need cultured yeast. But generally with our place, even the Chardonnay is wild fermented, the whole lot. Rosé, even the Shiraz.
Oh, okay.
So we don't add sulfur or anything to those guys. So otherwise you kill off the good yeast that's there already. And we don't have to add acid ever, because
I wouldn't think so.
There's naturally high in acidity where we are. So we pretty much, I just choose the amount of whole bunch that I'd like to use in the Pinots. Okay. And that's my winemaking trick. What about temperature control? No temperature. We don't have refrigeration. So with the reds...
So what kind of vessel are you actually fermenting in?
So we have open concrete fermenters, which were designed by Trevor. Okay. Because Langy was set up on concrete fermenters, because the previous owners, the Frattons, were of concrete background. So they... Yeah, of course. Being Italian, there's lots of stuff. There was very good concrete tanks up that way. Mm-hmm. And that's still, the Langy's still made in concrete in the new winery. But where we are, there were small 3-ton fermenters, and they were paraffin waxed line, because Australia's pH in concrete is not the same as what it is in France. No. There's an issue with Chapoutier and Heathcote a few years ago when they had all these concrete tanks made up for them. And locally? Yep. Yeah. And they were like, what's going on here? All our acids are all over the place. And it's because there was no paraffin wax on them. Right. Which it's an OH&S nightmare to actually get it on there. But sure. So that's what we've always had. So it takes a long time for the grapes to heat up, because you've got this thermal mass there. Sure. And how thick are the walls of the concrete tank? About 2.5 inches. Okay. On the front side, and because they're all next to each other, they're probably about 5 inches thick in the middle. So that does a pretty good job of regulating temperature anyway. Yeah, it's kind of constant. What we've always, occasionally you get one that might take off really quick because there's some crazy super yeast in there, or natural super yeast, which I discovered with the Nebbiolo from another vineyard this year that I was making. It just fermented like mad. I've never seen anything like it. But it took a long time to finish, which was really interesting. I think that might be a varietal thing though. Probably is. I've never made it before. Sure. That's exciting. Yeah. It looks good in barrel. But so there's no temperature control, because they take quite a while to heat up, quite a while to cool down. And we also seal them up and we do really long extended post ferment. So it can be anywhere from 4 weeks to 10 weeks with our Pinot. So yeah, the 2012 vintage was 8 weeks. It's quite a long time sitting there hanging out, but glad that I did it because that wine's drinking quite well at the moment from that. Otherwise it'd be too much fruit there, I think.
And in terms of the whites, the Chardonnay, for example, are you sort of keeping that on lees for an extended period after the fermentation?
Yeah, so it's always whole bunch pressed, and then it settles out in tank overnight, and then it's racked straight into barrels, and then I just let it go. So I fill the barrels about 3/4. Just let them go. Because the winery is pretty cool because we're in Ballarat.
Sure.
So, yeah, sometimes, they might get up to about 22 degrees sometimes. I've had one at 26, but it's not really a difference. It's just one barrel. Yeah. And, they all look pretty good.
What varieties are you now working with Eastern Peake? Are they the original sort of varieties?
Yeah, Eastern Peake is only got Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and we have a little bit of Syrah, which is planted over the back on our neighbour's vineyard, who planted vines for us 20 years ago. So his Shiraz is 10 years old, and it's a PT23 clone, which is a really good Shiraz clone, and it's starting to come into its own right now. It's good stuff. Yeah.
But you also make wines for other people, and it's there's a kind of community thing. I know like Appellation Ballarat is something that you're involved with. What are some of the other projects you're kind of involved with as far as the winemaking?
Yeah, well, the Appellation Ballarat, it's a project that I started about 4 years ago, I think it was. So all these vineyards around Ballarat, like they're all about 20 years old, and the owners didn't know what to do with them and things like that. And Ballarat's not allowed to be a region. It's quite small, so there's not enough actual bulk of vineyards there or size in wineries for it to allow to be.
Does it even belong to a geographic indicator?
We're just called Western Zone Victoria.
Right.
That's it, which is a pretty big area. So
does that go all the way to the border with South Australia?
Goes to Henty. Yeah.
Far out.
Yeah, Henty, Grampians, Pyrenees.
Okay.
And us. Yeah. So it's...
Which is weird because like most people refer to it as Ballarat or as the Grampians.
Well, these days they do. Like everyone refers to it as Ballarat, but like it's taken a long time to get to that point, and people still say Ballarat. Is there wine there, or is it good?
Yeah, that's a good
Which is fair enough because it's so small. But this is my idea behind the label was to just stick it up to the, to everyone to say, this is a region. So I just decided to call it Ballarat on the label. There's nothing else. It's just called Appellation Ballarat. So it's 4 vineyards from around there, 3 different soil types. I believe in single vineyard stuff big time to show it, but also want to show what the region's capable of. So it's been going really well, and it's actually in the last year it's really gained massive traction. That label to people actually now think of Ballarat as somewhere where there's Pinot grown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is really cool. And actually locals now in Ballarat are actually drinking Pinot instead of Shiraz, which
that's even better.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah.
And you're about to launch
got another label,
a new project, new label.
So I love other varieties and just seeing what they can do, and I love Western Zone Victoria, so Pyrenees and Grampians, and I also like a little bit of what's happening in Macedon too. But Macedon's sort of a bit the same as Ballarat. There's lots of little vineyards, but there also are a couple of big ones that get it over the line, and some icons as well. But it's a bit harder to get fruit out of Macedon because it's like everyone wants it because it's more planted out than Ballarat, and it's the same sort of temperature. Okay. So, yeah, but Western Zone Victoria, like the new label's Latta, so it's my last name, and it's just about all these sites that I've seen, like working in other wineries, seen these sites for quite a while now, and I've always wanted to do something with them, but it's like, why would I buy the fruit if I'm not going to do anything with it to sell it? But so 2010, I started buying some Sangiovese to muck around with for somebody else. And then I thought, that's a bit too good for those guys. They can have it, but I'm definitely going to buy the next vintage. And then the next vintage was 2011. So I was like, I won't buy it just yet. I'll let those guys buy it again. Yeah. And then like 2012, I like jumped in and I thought, all right, I'm going to start buying up a bit of fruit here and I might launch a label. So I've been like playing around since then, and it's taken quite a while to get there. Like the old man's like, when are you going to start selling this wine? You better get it out there. So December it's going to be launched.
That's exciting.
Yep.
So Sangiovese?
Sangiovese, there's a Shiraz. I had to buy the Shiraz because it's a great site for Shiraz.
Sure.
But I really wanted the Nebbiolo that's on the same vineyard.
Okay.
So, and we've known these guys for quite a long time. The vineyard's 10 years old now, so it's really starting to come into a good zone. So, yeah, so that's all Pyrenees fruit. And the Sangiovese, where it comes from, has got Cabernet next to it as well. And the Cabernet's very untrendy, but I just love that Cabernet that comes out of there. So I bought some of that. So that's looking very interesting at the moment. It's a bit of whole bunch in that, which is a bit of a no-no, but I think it's a bit of a yes. It's going well.
Cabernet Franc with a whole bunch. It can be pretty good.
Yeah.
As long as you've got
Sauvignon,
ripe berries and ripe seeds and ripe stalks.
Yeah. And then there's a Pinot from Macedon and a Sauvignon Blanc from Macedon, also from Munibel in the Pyrenees. So,
but you're basically just taking the same philosophies in terms of hands off and in the winery.
Yeah. So there's no sulfur used in these wines, and like there's a bit of whatever whole bunch you'd like to use. There's another wine that I've made that's a bit of a blend of. It's got Eastern Peake Chardonnay, the Macedon Sauvignon Blanc, and there's a bit of Gewurz planted in our vineyard by accident in the youngest block, and it's really aromatic. Like the stalks are just like very lifted. It's very unusual. I've never really had much to do with Gewurz, but yeah, this seems like it's some pretty strong Gewurz.
Yeah.
So I put that all into a barrel, and I've made this like cluster contacts, very unusual blend, which it's only one barrel, but I'm looking forward to getting it into bottle and getting it out there. It's I don't know what you'd call it. It's a cluster contacts, 3 varietal wine.
Yeah, it's certainly something you don't hear about that often, if at all.
No,
I'm not sure I've heard of a wine being made like that, but that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's kind of paving the way for. I want to do this on a larger scale,
right?
So, but not massive, but just enough.
Grow.
Yeah, not 1 barrel, but maybe 3.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And you live in Daylesford now, and
yep.
And you and your fiancée Jen have a lovely little shop in town and a wine bar as well, which is Wine in the Country.
Yeah, keeps us pretty busy.
Sure.
Yeah. I made Jen move from Melbourne to the winery, and then we decided that we'd go and settle in Daylesford and see what that was like, because I had to be closer, because I was commuting from Melbourne to the winery and I was just getting a bit burnt out in the last couple of years. So yeah, Jen decided that she would leave her job that she was at and open a shop. And we walked past this shop a few times, and it was been vacant for a long time. The guy just built it so he could have a mezzanine level that looks over the town. So, but he was kind of wanting to get someone in there to start paying for what he wanted there by the look of it. So yeah, she decided that that's what she was going to do and open this amazing little wine shop. So I wrote a wine list for her, which I'd never done before. So I just picked all the things that I really liked drinking, and the focus was Western Zone Victoria, which no one has really done before. And I thought that was a bit of a daring moment, but I think it will work well. And to have some really interesting internationals as well to back it all up. And it's been great. She's doing very well over there, and it's good to show all these smaller producers that nobody's got any idea about. Western Zone Victoria,
and you spend a bit of time in there as well, so I'm sure it must be great to be able to connect with the consumers, particularly the local and that sense of community, which kind of goes back to when you were growing up and there was that kind of.
It is, and there's a fellowship with wine drinkers there it's very exciting. Like, people are really interested. Like, there is 2 other bottle shops in town, and people go there and buy whatever they want, but they come to us because they want to have a chat and hear the story behind the producers.
Yeah.
sometimes they're in like these regulars in there, or some tourists are in there, and they've bought a bottle of wine, and the actual producer will walk in as well.
Yeah.
You can introduce them to the producer, and they can't believe it's all happening.
Yeah.
It's really good to see that. Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a game changer for everyone, as far as we can see.
Now, I'm sure you're probably having a lot of Pinot in the shop, as obviously Pinot is kind of the focus for Eastern Peak, and I can see a little bottle sitting over there on the table next to you.
Yep.
Is that something you were hoping to open up and show me?
Yeah, we'll have a crack.
So obviously people here, it's under screw cap.
Yeah.
Have Eastern Peak wines been under screw cap for long?
So we started with cork, like everyone else, and we moved away from cork as quickly as we could. Mm-hmm. So in 1998, we had shocking cork taint problem with a white wine, which was a really good Chardonnay that was made, and Norm was like, "We've got to change. We've got to find something else." And then there was a new product on the market called the plastic corks. So
synthetic ones.
No one knew anything about them in 1999. So we put some wines under those. Didn't work out. Found out that it actually takes the preservative out of the wine. So
fun.
Most of the vintage that I actually made was bottled under corks, under plastic corks. So we've never seen any of it from there. There are some that were under cork, but they've all been sold. So if anyone hears this, I'd love to see something that I made.
It's a legacy wine.
Yeah. So 2000, we went back to cork for 1 year.
Yeah.
We had a great agent that said, you got to have cork and got to change your label. So the label that you see now is the label that his name is Patrick Walsh. So he did some really good stuff for us, relaunching again with Eastern Peak, because everyone's like, your labels are very 90s. You need to be on the next wave for the Y2K, get it all happening, have a crash. So 2001, we were under screw cap and have been from there on.
Okay. Everything? Like whites, reds?
A whole lot. As soon as you could change. Well, we couldn't buy premium Burgundy under screw cap or even Burgundy. You could buy Riesling.
Bottle shape.
Yep. You could buy a Riesling bottle, but we're not in Germany, so we didn't do that.
So this is a particular Pinot. Like, how many different Pinots are now being made under the Eastern Peak label?
So we've always made intrinsic. It didn't always used to be called intrinsic, but in the early 2000s, we decided that we'd change it to intrinsic, which is what our core values are. So this is the 2013. It's not released until next year. So 2012, I started to make other stuff and kept more blocks. It was 3 blocks of Pinot, and I kept one of them separate that's never been kept before. So that is the youngest vine, which we call Mount Block. So there's a separate one of that in 2012. And the Walsh Block, which is where the Shiraz comes from, which is under the Eastern Peak, called Walsh Block. There's never been a Pinot under that. It's always gone into the appellation.
Yep.
And I decided that I really wanted to show that site. So I just made a barrel of 50% whole bunch, which is pretty intense Pinot, especially 2012 vintage. So I kept that separate. And we always, in an exceptional year, we'll keep the old vine separate, and we call that OB Terroir. So 2010 was, there's been 5 of them produced, and 2013 there is a ridiculous amount of single barrel, single stuff happening.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
That's very Burgundian.
Yeah. Well, I had to keep them separate, and it was the 30 years of the vineyard in 2013.
Sure.
So I thought, we've had the best crop we've ever had. The vineyard looked amazing.
Yeah.
It was the first time I ever had a vintage cellar hand help me out. So I could actually delegate a few tasks so I could relieve a bit of stress off myself.
Great.
So someone else could do things for me. So we made 9 different Pinots.
So 2013.
Yeah. Single barrel or double barrel stuff, and then the intrinsic. And it's the most intrinsic that we've produced in a long time. So, yeah.
Well, this is it's really beautifully aromatic. It's
it's come together nicely.
It's interesting for me because it's shown quite a bit of floral character, which is not necessarily something that I do see in local Pinot as often as I'd like to. but very bright, sort of crunchy berry notes as well.
Yeah, and the colour, and it's so bright as well. Like it looks like something's been done to it, but it just is what it is. That's pretty much straight out the concrete vats into a barrel.
It really creeps up on you, actually.
It does. Yeah.
It looks initially quite light and lovely, pure sort of fruit expression, and then all of a sudden you start to get a little bit more texture, and it kind of builds as it goes back on the palate.
Yeah, they're long wines. They just keep going. And
I can imagine them aging pretty well too.
Well, yeah, we had the 30 years of Eastern Peake last November, because that's when the vineyard was planted. And we opened back to 1987. We had quite a few guests down at the lake house to celebrate our 30th birthday there.
Very nice.
So, yeah, we opened up some bottles for all the guys that have been part of the winery and helped us out over the years, and really good customers. So the first wine was actually the sparkling that Trevor had made for us.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah, so it was a 1987 sparkling, which I'd tasted a year earlier, and I was very surprised that it was in such a great condition that it was. And on the night, it was stunning. Yeah. And right throughout the night, like there was an 88 Pinot. They were all just, there was no bad wines. Like Stacey Lee, who's the sommelier at the lake house, she actually said, "I'm not going in the restaurant tonight. I'm going to go up to the function there and I'm going to pour wines." And she was just like, afterwards, she said, there wasn't a lot of corked wines with all that stuff there, and they all look pretty bright. And for just to see all those over that time, it was pretty interesting. So, yeah, they do sell. Yeah.
Well, here is to another 30 vintages for Eastern Peake and for you. Owen, thank you very much for joining me. Give me all the ways people can contact. Give me all the social medias and websites and stuff like that. So we'll start off Eastern Peake.
Yeah, Eastern Peake is easternpeake.com.au. That's our website. There's an Instagram account, which is just Eastern Peake.
Yep.
That's probably my most active sort of social media thing.
And it's yourself?
It's me, myself. I take photos. I don't really talk a lot. There is a Twitter and a Facebook, but they're just there. I'm not very active on those. Yeah.
It sounds like you're busy enough already.
Yeah.
Anything for Appalachian Ballarat, or you might do something with Latta?
There's a website for Appalachian Ballarat and a Twitter account as well. Also, that's all me, but that's not very active either. And then the Latta label to be launched, that will be quite active, I'd say. I'm looking forward to getting out of the way, have a bit of fun.
And Wine in the Country, which is Jen.
Yeah. So Wine in the Country, very active on Facebook, and there's a great website as well. So you can go on there and have a look at the wines that we have on offer, which there's quite a few very interesting ones that people would know from Western Victoria, and lots that people would have no idea why that wine is there.
Well, absolutely. If you are up in Dalesford, I do highly recommend personally popping into One in the Country, saying hi to Jen or to Owen, whoever's there. And you're releasing some wines soon, I think, which are going to be available in lots of lovely shops, definitely down in Melbourne, and hopefully some good restaurants and bars as well. Yeah,
I'm sure that our great friend James Broadway will have his finger on the pulse.
Yes, probably one safe bet is always going to be Goethe Street Enoteca in Fitzroy. But thanks again, Owen, and looking forward to trying some more wines as they get released.
No dramas, James. Thank you.
Guys, as always, thank you so much for listening. You can follow myself on Instagram and Twitter at IntrepidWino. Jump onto my website, intrepidwino.com, where you can listen to all the podcasts, and there's got lots of links and also some other stuff I've written in the past. I really do recommend highly people jump onto iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe to the podcast. That's the best way to keeping up to date with all the new episodes. You can download them there, and whilst you're there, do please rate and review. It does help me out. As always, looking forward to getting more feedback, any questions you might have, and supporting all of the guests who generously donate their time. But until next time, bye.